for those who are just joining us, welcome. We will be speaking today with Dr. Yolanda Harper, who's going to be presenting on bringing career and occupational competencies to life. Everyone's microphones will be muted for this session, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat, and they will be addressed at the end. Also, keep an eye on the chat for a link to a helpful session survey at the end, and you'll also be able to download a certificate of attendance. So without further ado, Dr. Harper.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you, Morgan. While I'm sharing my screen, if you've been sitting for a while, get up and stretch and get a little transition music. Okay, so let's get started here. Bringing career and occupational competencies. Thank you all for being here. And again, take care of yourselves. If you've been sitting at the screen for a while, get up, stretch, move, do what you need to do to be well. So if you've stuck with us since day one, you've seen a lot about the Nace competencies and career readiness. And that's part of what we're focusing obviously on in this track as well. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through them. You may have seen this particular table in a variety of sessions that is based on an employee survey, employer surveys that Nace, the National Association for Colleges Employers, does every year. I will highlight though, beyond looking at the titles of the competencies, it is worth your time, if you haven't done so, to actually look at the descriptions. You'll see there's significant overlap. For example, even though global and multicultural fluency is in the 8th position, if you read the actual description of teamwork and collaboration, you see a lot of that content in that particular competency as well. Okay, so these categories are somewhat arbitrary where I've placed assignments and ideas, but there's career readiness in terms of job attainment, and then there's career readiness in terms of the knowledge and skills and expertise needed associated with an occupation or a discipline. So these are some common assignments that we see and that we use to facilitate and assess career readiness of our students. With resumes, we can have students do their own resume, or we can have them pick a profession and write their resume aspirationally. So not where you are today, but when you're ready to apply for that position, what are the pieces you need to have in place in your resume to be ready to apply for that position? I see a lot of courses incorporate cover letters into assignments. I don't see a lot of follow-up letters, which is also important for students to be proficient in being able to write a follow-up letter after an interview. And it's real important for some students to provide extra resources like military to civilian job seekers or full-time parents who are looking to enter the workplace. There are resources to help them be able to articulate their skills and their interests and abilities in a way that matches the jobs. I remember a military student I had who had very high rank. She was about to retire from the service, and she was in her cover letter, she wrote all of the types of weaponry she was proficient in and the different tactical units she had supervised, but she was applying for a job to work in childcare. And so I talked with her about, these are wonderful experiences, but let's see how we can talk about the responsibilities that you had for ensuring safety, your proficiency in providing structure, your ability to facilitate cooperation and teamwork rather than listing several types of weapons and names of tactical units. And then, of course, also talk about your compassion and your caring and your competency in working with children and your desire to see them do their best. So, and there are resources available to help us coach students in those particular ways. The introductions are a wonderful place to find out what students' career interests are. And I have a quick question. I can't see the chat, but if somebody would let me know how people are answering this. Are quizzes relevant, do you think, to career preparation? Because a lot of our, not a lot, but some of our courses do have quizzes. So what do you think, yes or no? Am I getting any answers?
Yep, Yolanda, this is Morgan. I can read some of these off. So it depends on the content, maybe for building confidence in knowledge attained.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, so it depends. And the reality, of course, there's the time on task component of quizzes, but then increasingly, for a variety of reasons, employers are finding out that just having a college degree doesn't tell them what they need to know about students' proficiency in specific areas. So a lot of entry-level positions do require what we would call quizzes or knowledge type tests. And then, of course, if students are going on for certifications and licensure, just the more comfortable they are with those types of exams, multiple choice exams, it's just better to have those in their histories. And of course, if you wanted to make them deeper, you can always have students explain their logic or reasoning for selecting a particular answer on a quiz. All right, so let's look at kind of a foundation to being able to build competencies into a course is to know what students are interested in. So ask them. And I think many of us do that already. And then I create a table. I have an Excel sheet for every course where I keep track of whom I responded to in any particular week. And the first column after the student's name, I just keep track of the career interests that they tell me that in week one that they're considering. Now, in terms of bringing the competencies to life, I think in terms of color and movement. And so these are all tools that many of us use already to different degrees. And it again, just adds energy and interest to the course rather than just a page full of text throughout it. And I'll show some examples as we go along the way. People sometimes ask me if I'm concerned or if I run into trouble using images I find online. I've never had a problem, but I stay away from images that clearly have watermarks because they're trying to protect those images. And also by using WordPress, I can put in the alt text one time and use the image in any class. And I put a caption where the image came from. And most web people who own websites actually like it if you credit them and they think of it as an opportunity that someone might actually visit their site. So I haven't run into any trouble, but if you ever did, you can just not use an image. Okay. Now for the interest that students express, I don't look up every single job title that students share, but it is helpful to look at some of those that come up over and over again, especially for building courses and coming up with content for discussions. And if you look at a job description, you will see just a plethora of suggestions for assignments. All of these green lines are highlighting ideas that could easily be turned into assignments. And then others could easily be turned into content for discussions. So I think job descriptions are a great place to find out ideas of how to incorporate competencies in your course. And then I use a lot of scenarios or prompts or decision-making, critical thinking, problem solving, if you will, conversations in the discussion. So in this particular example, students were asked, the assignment was to use mystorybook.com to create a children's story to prepare a child who's going to have to go see a psychologist for testing, much like the books that are out there, Janie's going to see the dentist or Malik is going to the doctor. Well, this one, you create a story for a child going to be tested. And this particular student, then after sharing her story, I provided her just a few links to a couple of intelligence tests. So she chose to recommend the WISC, which is totally appropriate. And she chose a child who was 6 years old. Well, it just so happens that for Wechsler, there are 2 tests that could have been given. And so to make sure she's familiar with both options and look at some information about both tests, and then ultimately take the role of a psychologist testing a 6-year-old child, and how would you decide whether to administer which tests? In this particular one, after the student developed an assessment plan, as could very well happen in a career setting, even if they're volunteering at an agency or actually working in a career capacity, a paid capacity, a parent may come to them and said, you know, I was doing some surfing, my child's been diagnosed with ADHD, and I ran across this website that costs $130 a year. Should, you know, what do you think? Is it worth it? Is it worth my money to pay for that service? And so have the student look at the free portions of that particular service, and then share their recommendation and their rationale. Okay, so now look at this one. In this particular one, there was a prompt that was an example of a culturally unfair test question. The question was, what are the 4 seasons of the year? And the child responded, deer, duck, rabbit, and squirrel. And so the students are asked to write about reliability, validity, cultural fairness, and then also ultimately make some recommendations to the parents. How would you interpret the results to the parents? And this is what one student wrote in that one section about what they would interpret to the parents. What do you notice about this? Is it really parent friendly? It's full of jargon. And so, and a lot of times students will pretty much parrot what's in the book or the articles, and you're not quite sure if they really understand it. In fact, in this particular case, I'm wondering how much she really does understand. And being able to interpret jargon on it and translate it into everyday language is a very important oral communication competency. And so I prompted her to tell us how you would communicate what you just wrote there now, actual to the parents. Give me an actual script, or you can use the Canvas recording tool to give them your feedback orally. And I often give students those choices of writing their script or recording it back. And then I always include just a visual reminder, an image of where they can find the recording tool. And then sometimes I will record video with silhouettes, and sometimes I'll just post them exactly like this and have students respond to them. So how would you respond to this particular person? So be specific. In this particular one, the student was pretty vague about the recommendation. And so I have the client go back now and ask exactly how do you recommend that? I use a lot of videos in the classes. Goes backwards. And ask them to take the role of the professional in the video, or I might ask them to take the information and now take a 7-minute presentation and give me a 1-minute presentation video highlight of the key points, or I might come up with a scenario. The parent or client asks you something, and now based on the knowledge shared in the video, how would you answer that particular question? In terms of perspectives, I may share videos like this is here's a video of an individual diagnosed with autism sharing her story, and here we have a professional talking about autism. And so then I may ask a series of questions and have the students answer the question, how do you think this young lady would answer the question versus how do you think this professional would answer the question? What questions would you have for each of these presenters? How is this relevant to your profession? What more do you need to know? If you were recording this particular video as a professional, what would you add? What would you present differently? Things like that. Here. Oh, that didn't work right. Let me fix that. Oops. going the wrong way here. Okay, so in this particular one, the student had given the client some feedback, and then the client came back to the student, or had the afterwards, and the student interpreted to the client that the assessment results showed that they were exaggerating. And the client asked, "What do you mean I'm exaggerating?" And this particular student wrote, the exaggerating is exactly what it says, just like you're doing right now. That was the student's response. And so I went back with the student, and my response was, "Well, you know, I meant what you said." Made me chuckle a little bit, because you were communicating directly to this particular client the way they, on her level. But let's think about some ways, other ways you might want to say that in a gentler, friendlier way. You know, for some clients that might be a good way to catch her attention and prep her for counseling therapy. But others, you might want to think about saying it in a different way, and then I offered some potential alternatives. You might say this or this, rather than the same way, you know, you just, the report says you're exaggerated, and that's what I meant, kind of thing. Other examples. And so you get the idea, just coming up with ways to create little miniature dialogues. In this particular case, the student had given some feedback, and the client went home and told the companion that the psychologist said that, you know, you're the source of my stress, basically. And then the next part that I posed to the student, now you get a call from the angry partner saying, "Well, my wife or my girlfriend, my fiance said that I'm the cause of your problems, and that's what you said. So how do you respond to that partner? Do you have ethical permission to talk to him in this particular case? Do you have, if so, what would you say? If not, what would you say?" This one was about explaining concepts. So the feedback said that the client scored at the 47th percentile. And in this particular case, then we're asking the student to share, to make sure they're able to interpret that to the client. Don't just say 47th percentile, you know, so the client comes back and says, "So what does that mean? Does that mean I only got 47% correct?" And then, so those kind of things. I'll skip that one. And then, like I said, I sometimes will actually do recordings. And so here's an example of a time where the students gave pretty verbatim feedback from what was actually in the report. And one of the things they said was that your anxiety is at a moderate level, and also that they had acute anxiety. And so in the recording I made, because I thought this one needed more than just kind of words on a page, they needed the affects to be able to respond to. So on the recording, I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, I'm really not understanding what you said. You said my anxiety is moderate. How can you say that? I am stressed all the time, all the time. It doesn't feel moderate to me. My stress is sky high. And what do you mean I have acute anxiety? My anxiety ain't cute." And so then how do you, so the point is that they're using jargon. How do you translate that into language that the client can understand? Let me check the time here. Okay, and then other ways to incorporate kind of skills that they may use in the world outside of the university is fact checking articles that they find online. Sometimes you can find some and just that are out there as is, ask them to fact check them, find scholarly, incredible sources to back up what these articles are saying that have no references in them, or if they're contradictory information. Or you can copy the articles and strategically manipulate some of the content and ask them to fact check that as well. Let me see. In terms, I think we've had a lot of some presentations on this, but back when I was in school, we talked about word or story problems. Could certainly continue to do that. Have students create infographics to explain the concepts, or audios and videos to explain how would you teach it to a child. And the last half year has taught us that many who thought they would never have to teach math or science concepts to a child because they weren't going into education, or were finding that because schools were closed and they were having to homeschool for the first time, that they were having to teach some of those skills to children as well. Let's see. Web quests are great ways to bridge the classroom with careers. And I say web quests and / library quests because I like my students to do a combination of both. It's a great way to learn about and to synthesize knowledge about specific topics and to create specific products. These are just some examples, and I'm going to share the slides because I know I'm going through these quickly to try to get us back caught up on time. But these are just some things that components that could be a part of a career-related web quest. And then the actual product that they do after they find out these pieces of information could be a presentation. They could create a brochure or handout to advise for a career advisement, put it in a portfolio, create an infographic. And oftentimes I might have a list of specific questions that they may have to answer and some kind of problem-based scenario. And then, of course, having them write for different audiences. And whenever we can have them write kind of the same information for different audiences, I think that could be helpful. So how would you communicate that to another colleague versus a peer versus just someone in the general public or a child or a specific demographic group, et cetera. More applied writing, any of these, depending on what their career interests and goals are, they may have to be a part of a team or actually write policies, guidelines, procedures, instructions, et cetera. Okay. And then I think most of us use most of these particular tools, and integrating any of these tools into a course can be helpful. One thing I will say, we've heard a lot about LinkedIn over the past few days. If you have a student that you see does just an outstanding job with a slide presentation, I would encourage them to add that presentation to their link profile under SlideShare. And then, of course, proficiency in any of these basic tools. Anytime we can build these into a course, it only helps with career preparation. Okay, so I think I'm close to getting us back on track. Any questions or comments? Let me stop sharing so I can read the chat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harper. That was an excellent presentation full of practical ways to incorporate some of the theoretical concepts that the earlier presentations discussed.